those folks watching on the internet, good morning and welcome to Open Door Bible Church. This is our Thanksgiving Sunday here. We've sung Thanksgiving songs. We're going to have a Thanksgiving meal. I encourage you to come Wednesday night. We're going to do something different on Wednesday night. It'll be our Thanksgiving Eve service. There's no afternoon Bible study this week. But I'm going to teach you about the pilgrim that fell overboard. There's probably a story you've not heard before.
My kids are descended from him.
Are they? Okay. So are some presidents. So I got an interesting story to do with you on Wednesday night. So please come. It'll be a blessing. Bring something for dessert with you, because we're going to overload on sweets after the message, after our time together. There'll be some eggnog, there'll be some cookies and desserts, and just come and be with us. All right, I'm going to read you the first 7 verses. Then the whole multitude of them arose and led him to Pilate, him being Jesus. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this fellow perverting the nation, forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king." Then Pilate asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered and said to him, "It is as you say." So Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no fault in this man." But they were the more fierce, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place." When Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked if the man were a Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Let's go through and talk about the verses. Verse 1, they led him to Pilate. Remember, the Roman government did not allow the Jewish leaders the authority to execute a criminal. So the religious leaders sent Jesus to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor over the region. Now, Pilate's not a dummy.
No.
Pilate understands what's going on. He understands these guys are jealous of Jesus. And they know they can't go to Pilate and say, "We want to get rid of this guy because he's teaching different doctrine than what we're teaching." So what they had to find was charges that the Roman government would recognize. So here were the charges. "We found this fellow perverting the nation, forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself was Christ a king." At the same time, the religious leaders knew that Pilate wouldn't care about the religious stuff, so they had to come up with civil-sounding charges. So they accused him of being a revolutionary. They said he's perverting the nation. That Jesus incited the people not to pay their taxes. Now, Jesus never said, "Don't pay taxes." He said, "Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and render unto God the things that are God." But it's awful easy to take things and twist them if you want them. And that Jesus claimed to be a king in opposition to Caesar, saying that he himself is a king. He also told them, "My kingdom is not of this world." He was no danger to Rome. Then Pilate asked him, saying, "Are you king of the Jews?" I can't imagine what Pilate was thinking as he looked at Jesus. He was beaten. He was bloody. Jesus didn't look regal or majestic. He didn't look like a threat to the Roman government. He just looked like a guy that the religious leaders had turned against. When he asked him, "Are you king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "It is as you say." I don't know how hard those words hit Pilate, but they should have knocked him right to the ground, because he now knew what he was dealing with. This is indeed the Son of God. Now Pilate very quickly says in verse 4, I find no fault in him. This was Pilate's verdict. Though Pilate was a cruel, ruthless man, he wasn't stupid. He could see through the motives of the religious leaders and had no problem in declaring Jesus was innocent. But the people in verse 5, but they were the more fierce. In response, the religious leaders became more fierce and emphasized the accusations. Something in human nature makes us think if we shout, it means more. So they started shouting. They got louder and louder. They stirred up the people. Verse 6, he asked if the man were a Galilean. They had mentioned his ministry started in Galilee. He would now refer Jesus to Herod. That's Herod Antipas, ruler of Galilee. That's the same guy that ordered John the Baptist beheading. Not a guy that he was going to be favorable to what you're doing. Verse 7, as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod. Herod was perplexed with the people's attitude, with the commotion. He wanted a way out, and he found it. I'll send this guy to Herod, and it'll become Herod's problem, not mine. So verses 8 through 12, we're now going to see him before Herod. Now when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired for a long time to see him, because he had heard many things about him, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him. Then he questioned him with many words, but he answered him nothing. And the chief priests and the scribes stood and vehemently accused him. Then Herod, with his men of war, treated him with contempt and mocked him, arrayed him in a glorious robe, and sent him back to Pilate. He didn't find a reason to execute him. That very day, Pilate and Herod became friends with each other, for previously they had been at enmity with each other. So here these two guys become friends over Jesus. All right, verse 8. When Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired for a long time to see him. Now Herod had heard that Jesus did miracles. He wanted to see a miracle, not because it had anything to do with God, but because it would be entertaining. He do a miracle for us. Jesus didn't do a miracle. At this point, Herod only wanted to hear from Jesus what he wanted to hear. It says he questioned him with many words. He wanted Jesus to prove himself, demanding a miracle. Many people today still want the same thing. Jesus, do something for us. Do something showy. Do something flashy. Prove who you are. Humor me, Jesus. Jesus still doesn't respond to that kind of thing. Verse 9, he questioned him with many words, but he answered him nothing. Herod governed over Galilee, where Jesus spent most of his ministry. He had had countless opportunities to hear Jesus again and again. Jesus did not speak in secret meetings or in hiding places. All this led Jesus to understand the truth about Herod. He was not a sincere seeker. Herod was not looking for the truth. Herod was looking to be entertained. Jesus was never in the entertainment business. Then Herod, with his men of war, treated him with contempt and mocked him. The contempt and mockery show what Herod really thought of Jesus. When Jesus refused to perform a miracle, when Jesus refused to entertain Herod, Herod entertained himself by mistreating Jesus. Verse 12 says that very day Pilate and Herod became friends. Now, these guys had no common ground. They disliked each other. But they both didn't like Jesus. And that gave them the grounds for friendship. All right, so now he's back to Pilate. Then Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests, rulers, and the people, said to them, "You have brought me this man as one who misleads the people. And indeed, having examined him in your presence," he's going to say it again now, "I find no fault in this man concerning those things which you accuse him. No, neither did Herod. For I sent you back to him, and indeed nothing deserving of death has been done by him. I will therefore chastise him and release him. For it was necessary for him to release one of them at the feast." So Herod didn't find a reason to execute him. Pilate didn't find a reason to execute him. He's going back over this. So verse 14. "Having examined him in your presence, I have found no fault in this man. Indeed, nothing worthy of death has been done by him." Pilate clearly and eloquently declared Jesus innocent of any crime. This was the result of his careful examination of both Jesus and the evidence brought against him. "Therefore I will chastise him and release him." Now, I read that over, you say, "Oh good, Jesus is going to get off." No, he's not. When he talks about chastising him, he's talking about having him scourged. The Roman custom of scourging was a brutal beating. Blows came from a whip with many leather strands, each having sharp pieces of bone or metal at the ends. It reduced the back to raw flesh, which would have resembled hamburger. That's how brutal the beating was. It was not unusual for a criminal to die from scourging. Many of these guys never survived the scourging to get to the crucifixion. They died from the beating. So obviously this is not right. He's declared the guy innocent, but he's still going to beat him almost to death to please the crowd. Now, their custom, their thing that they had done for years, is they would release one to them at the feast. So Herod's got to release somebody. Pilate's got to release somebody. We'll release Jesus. That'll solve the problem. Except the people don't like that. Verses 18 through 25. "And they all cried out at once, saying, 'Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas, who had been thrown into prison for a certain rebellion made in the city, and for murder.' Pilate, therefore, wishing to release Jesus, again called out to them. But they shouted, 'Crucify him! Crucify him!' Then he said to them for the third time, 'Why? What evil has he done? I find no reason for death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go.' But they were insistent, demanding with loud voices that he be crucified. And the voices of these men and of the chief priests prevailed. So Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they requested. And he released to them the one who they requested, who for rebellion and murder had been thrown into prison. But he delivered Jesus to their will." Now, he knows went on beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jesus is innocent. He said it 3 times. But the crowd's making a fuss, and he's going to quiet the crowd down any way he has to. So verse 18, "Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas." The crowd, whom Pilate was convinced would release Jesus, instead condemned him. Because of this, Pilate did not find the courage to oppose both the religious leaders and the crowd. Pilate's a coward. He's going to take the easy way out. Verse 21, "But they shouted, 'Crucify him! Crucify him!'" This was a strange, almost mob scene. And I want you to see the irony in it. Here is this ruthless Roman governor trying to win the life of a miracle-working Jewish teacher against the efforts of the crowd to crucify Jesus. The crowds, that's they in verse 23, were whipped up by the religious leaders, expressed their displeasure with Pilate's verdict, and demanded not only that Jesus be taken away and crucified, but also that Barabbas be released. Now, Barabbas was not a nice guy. Barabbas belonged in jail. Okay. Verse 25, he released for them the one whom they requested, whom for rebellion and murder had been thrown into prison. But he delivered Jesus to their will. The crowd rejected Jesus and embraced Barabbas, whose name means son of the Father. He was nothing but a terrorist and a murderer. And that's what they chose over Jesus. I mean, it's as messed up can get. Verse 26, we're going to have a new player. Now, as they led him away, they laid hold of a certain man, Simon, a Cyrenian, who was coming from the country. On him they laid the cross, that he might bear it after Jesus. Even before Jesus was to be scourged, his physical condition was weak. It is reasonable to assume that Jesus was in good physical condition up until the night of his arrest. The severe scourging, with its intense pain and appreciable blood loss, probably left Jesus either in shock or in what they call pre-shock state. The physical and mental abuse delivered out by the Jews and the Romans, as well as the lack of food, water, and sleep, also contributed to the generally weakened state. Therefore, even before the actual crucifixion, Jesus' medical condition was at least serious and possibly critical. They led him away. As Jesus was led to crucifixion, he was, like all victims of crucifixion, forced to carry the wooden beam he would hang on. Now, the weight of the entire cross was typically 300 pounds. The victim only carried the crossbar, which weighed anywhere from 75 to 125 pounds. When the victim carried the crossbar, he was usually stripped naked, and his hands were often tied to the wood. I mean, this is when we put the cross up outside, put the vertical piece in the ground, and several of us on ladders hoisted up that center section. It was heavy. I mean, imagine Jesus trying to carry that in his weakened physical condition. So they laid hold of a certain man. The weakened condition of Jesus required this. The man's name was Simon. He was from a place called Cyrene, which is in northern Africa. If you looked at a map today, it would be called Libya. No doubt Simon was visiting Jerusalem as a Passover pilgrim from his native land about 800 miles away. He knew little, if anything, about Jesus and had no particular desire to be associated with him. Yet the Romans were the law, and Simon was not given a choice. You carry the cross or you die. These guys didn't give you a lot of wiggle room. Now, many people have speculated that Simon was a black man. I hear that story everywhere. It's in most of my commentaries. There's no proof other than he came from a country that was populated by black people. Could have been a black person, could have been a Jew, could have been anything. We don't know. All right. As they lead Jesus out, he speaks to the daughters of Jerusalem. Verse 27. And a great multitude of people followed him, and women also mourned and lamented him. But Jesus, turning to them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, Do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and your children. For indeed the days are coming in which they will say, Blessed are the barren wombs that never bore, and breasts which never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, Cover us. For if they do these things in the green wood, what will be done in the dry? So you get this great multitude of people following him. It was customary for a great multitude to follow the condemned criminal on his way to crucifixion. These crucifixions were public events. They were public spectacles. According to the customs of crucifixion, a Roman guard led with a sign that carried the man's name and his crime. As they marched through the city, the Roman guard would call out the name and the crime along the way to the place of crucifixion. They normally took the longest way possible, so as many people as possible could see how the Roman Empire treated its enemies. This was crime control in those days. They wanted you to see how terrible it was to commit a crime against the government. So they made sure that everybody saw this. That was how they controlled crime. Verse 28, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. With good reason, certain women mourned and lamented when they saw Jesus being treated in this fashion. Jesus essentially told them, don't weep for me, weep for those who reject me. All right? Blessed are the barren. Now, normally Jewish custom did just the opposite. It praised motherhood and stigmatized the barren. Remember Elizabeth? She was looked down on because she was barren all those years. But the days of the fall of Jerusalem would be so severe that women would far prefer not to have had children rather than to have their children go through the ordeal that awaited them. Now, Jesus tells them this is coming. It happens 37 years later, in the year 70 AD, when Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed and the city was leveled. Only 37 years later. So Jesus is telling them something that's going to happen in their lifetimes. All right, verses 32 and 33. There were also two others, criminals, led with him to be put to death. And when they had come to the place called Calvary, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right hand and the other on the left. So Calvary was a specific place outside the walls of the city, but it was on the main road going into the city. Everybody walked by there on a regular basis. This was done, again, to make sure everybody saw what was going on. This was how they deterred crime. It says, there they crucified him. In the days the New Testament was written, the practice of crucifixion needed no explanation. In the many generations since then, most people do not appreciate what a person experienced in the ordeal of execution by crucifixion. This was a horrible, horrible way to die. Now, the Romans didn't invent crucifixion, but they certainly perfected it. They knew exactly how to keep you alive and in pain for the longest time possible. Everything about crucifixion was designed to draw out the amount of time you were in agony. It was done on purpose to be a slow death. The combination of scourging and crucifixion made death on the cross especially brutal. The victim's back was first torn open by the scourging, then the clotting of blood was ripped open again when the clothes were torn off before crucifixion. The victim was then thrown on the ground to nail his hands to the crossbeam. and the wounds on the back were again torn open and filled with dirt. Then as the victim hung on the cross, each breath caused the painful wounds in the back to scrape against the rough wood of the upright beam. I mean, this was just pure torture, pure agony. When the nails were driven through the wrists, it severed the large median nerve. This stimulated nerve produced excruciating bolts of fiery pain in both arms, and often gave the victim a claw-like grip in his hands because he couldn't open his hands up because the nerve was severed. Beyond the extreme pain, the major effect of crucifixion was to restrict normal breathing. The weight of the body pulling down on the arms and shoulders tended to fix the respiratory muscles in an inhaling state, and it hindered the exhaling. The lack of adequate respiration resulted in severe muscle cramps, which further hindered breathing. To get a good breath, the victim had to push up against the feet and flex the elbows, pulling from the shoulders. Putting the weight of the body on the feet with a nail driven through them produced searing pain. The flexing of the elbows twisted the hands that were hanging by the nails. Lifting the body for a breath also painfully scraped the back against the rough wooden cross. Each effort to get a proper breath was agonizing and exhausting. This is what Jesus went through for us, folks. How bad was crucifixion? We get our English word excruciating from the Roman word out of the cross. Consider how terrible sin must be in the sight of God to require such a sacrifice. Jesus paid the price, so we didn't have to pay it. The most significant thing about Jesus' suffering was that he was not in any sense a victim of circumstances. Jesus was in control the entire time. Jesus said in John chapter 10, verse 18, "No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of myself." Now, this would be terrible enough to go through if you deserved it. Jesus accepted this willingly to pay the price for your sins and for my sins. All right, verses 34 through 38, the folks on either side of Jesus. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And they divided his garments and cast lots. And the people stood looking on. But even the rulers with them sneered, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ, the chosen of God." The soldiers also mocked him, coming and offering him sour wine, and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." An inscription also was written over him in letters of Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. Those were the three main languages of the day. "This is the King of the Jews." That's the same sign they walked around with him as he was heading to the cross. So he says in verse 34, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." The love of Jesus never fails. On the cross, in this excruciating pain, he prayed for his executioners, asking God the Father not to hold this sin against him. In this, Jesus fulfilled his own command to love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. Can you imagine Jesus mustering up that kind of love for what he's going through? So as they divided his garments and cast lots, On the cross, Jesus retained no material possessions. Even the clothes on his back were taken and divided by the roll of dice. This shows that Jesus came all the way down the ladder to accomplish our salvation. He let go of absolutely everything, even his clothes, becoming completely poor for us, so we could become completely rich in him. Right, verse 35, even the rulers with them sneered. The soldiers also mocked him. Jesus was not honored or encouraged as he hung on the cross. Instead, he was scorned and mocked. His religious enemies said, he saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ, the chosen of God. I want you to get this. This is profound. It is precisely because he did not save himself on the cross that he could save others. It could rightly be said that love kept Jesus on the cross, not the nails. Jesus stayed on the cross. Jesus went through this terrible, agonizing death for you and for me. All right, verses 39 through 43. Then one of the criminals who were hanged blasphemed him, saying, if you are the Christ, save yourself and us. But the other answering rebuked him, saying, do you not even fear God, seeing you are under the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive the due rewards of our deed. But this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus said to him, assuredly, I say to you today, you will be with me in paradise. Now, I'm not going to take a lot of time and explain paradise today. I'm going to do the last chapter of Luke next Sunday. The following Sunday, I'm going to do a whole message on where was Jesus while his body was in the grave. I'm going to have slides that explain it. I'll give you a copy of the slides. You can make notes on them. But we'll spend a whole day studying about paradise and what that verse means. Verse 39, one of the criminals who was hanged blasphemed him. He's making fun of Jesus. Why don't you save you and us? Verse 40, but the other answering rebuked him. Both Matthew and Mark indicate that both criminals mocked Jesus. Though at first it was both of them and the hour spent on the cross, one of the criminals came to see things differently and actually put his trust in Jesus. Jesus said to him, assuredly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. This guy gets saved on the cross. No baptism, no lessons, never went to church, just put his faith in Jesus as he was dying. And Jesus said, today, that same day, you will be with me in paradise. Jesus went to paradise. One of these guys went with him. The other guy didn't. All right. Verse 44 through 46. Now it was about the 6th hour. That would be noon to you and me. There was darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. That would be 3 p.m. So it was dark, pitch dark, from noon to 3. Then the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. When Jesus had cried out with a loud voice, he said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. He died. He gave up life. It says there was darkness over the earth until the 9th hour. The remarkable darkness over all the earth showed the agony of creation itself and the Creator's suffering. Now there was a Roman historian named Phlegon who wrote in the 4th year of the 202nd Olympiad. They used the Olympics to keep track of time. There was an extraordinary eclipse of the sun at the 6th hour. The day turned to dark night so that the stars in heaven were seen, and there was an earthquake. Now, he describes it as an eclipse of the sun. Great way to explain it, however, not true. Passover always happened at the full moon. You can't get an eclipse when there's a full moon. So, I got a historian recording it was dark, he just didn't give it the right explanation. The veil of the temple was torn in two. Tearing of the temple signified at least two things. First, man now has free access to the throne of grace by the cross. Second, no one should ever think again that God dwells in temples made with hands. Now, Matthew, it doesn't tell you here. Here it just says the veil of the temple was torn in two. Matthew gives the detail that the curtain was torn from the top to the bottom. It was torn from heaven. It was not torn from earth. By the way, man could not tear that curtain. Curtain was very thick. It was thick as a man's hand. And that's how it's described in the Old Testament. When they would change the curtain each year, it would take 300 priests to take down the old curtain and then put up the new curtain. This wasn't anything flimsy. This was a huge curtain. This thick, woven, heavy. Only God could tear it. Verse 46. When Jesus had cried out with a loud voice, when Jesus cried out, he then spoke to the Father in the lines that follow. John 19:30 tells us what he said. It is finished. That it is finished is one word in the Greek. The preferred translation of that one word in the Greek is a business term you would recognize. Paid in full. My bill was stamped. Paid in full by the blood of Jesus. This was the cry of a winner because Jesus had paid in full the debt of sin that we owed and had finished the eternal purpose that he came for. Jesus did not die a victim. He died victorious. Some point before he died, the veil of the temple was torn in two. Before he cried out, it is finished. And an awesome spiritual transaction took place. God the Father set upon Jesus all the guilt and the wrath our sin deserved. And he bore it in himself perfectly, totally satisfying the wrath of God. I don't know why churches still tell you that you got to work for your salvation. Jesus paid it all. There's nothing left for us to do. We're just to accept it and be thankful for it. I'm going to read you from Isaiah 53, verses 3 through 5. Describes what Jesus went through. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. He healed what sin had done to us. No one else could do that. He did that by what he did on the cross. He says, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Jesus' work on the cross was accomplished. With this prayer, Jesus yielded his spirit to his Father. This shows that Jesus gave up his life, and when he wanted to and how he wanted to. No one took his life from him. He gave it up when his work was finished. Having said this, he breathed his last. Once the work of the cross was accomplished, Jesus felt no further need to endure the suffering. He yielded his spirit to God, and he yielded his body to death. How did the bystanders react? Verses 47 through 49. So when the centurion saw what had happened, he glorified God, saying, certainly this was a righteous man. And the whole crowd who came together to that sight, seeing what had been done, beat their breasts and returned. But all his acquaintances and the women who followed him from Galilee stood at a distance, watching these things. When the centurion saw what had happened, he glorified God. Now this guy is a Gentile, he's a soldier, he's a professional executioner. He's seen hundreds, if not thousands, of people crucified. But he could see there was something different about Jesus. Nobody ever handled crucifixion the way Jesus did. The whole crowd who came together to that sight, seeing what had been done, beat their breasts and returned. Others went home sadly. They were too close to Jesus to see how remarkable his death was. And they forgot his promise to rise again. Verses 50 through 56 tell about his burial. Now behold, there was a man named Joseph, a council member, a good and just man. He had not consented to the decision and deed. He was from Arimathea, a city of the Jews, who himself was waiting for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down, wrapped it in linen, and laid it in a tomb that was hewn out of the rock, where no one had ever been laid before. That day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew near. And the woman who had come with him from Galilee followed after, and they observed the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils, and they rested on the Sabbath, according to the commandment. So verse 52, this man, this Joseph of Arimathea, went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Do you understand the courage that took? Do you understand how he just identified himself with Jesus? He just put a target on his back for the rest of his life. And he did it gladly. Now, customarily, the bodies of crucified criminals were left on their crosses, just again as a public display of the fact you didn't want to cross Rome. The Jews wanted no such horror displayed during the Passover season, and the Romans were known to grant the corpses to friends and relatives for proper burial. Now, Joseph did not serve Jesus in many ways, but he did serve him in a way no one else could. It was not possible for Peter, James, John, or even the many women who served Jesus to provide a tomb. Tombs were expensive, but Joseph could and did. The lesson is we should serve God in whatever way we can. Verse 53 says, he was laid in a tomb that was hewn out of rock, where no one had ever laid. This was Joseph's tomb. He had built it for himself. He gave it to Jesus. It's okay. In 3 days, Jesus will give it back.
Yeah.
All right? Now, verse 54 explains it. I'm going to put to bed all the arguments about was Jesus crucified on a Thursday or Friday. Let's read the verse and let it teach us. That day was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath drew near. The Sabbath is what day of the week? Saturday. If Saturday is drawing near, what day is it?
Friday.
It's Friday. So all these articles you want to read, how somebody calculates dates, it says, oh no, Jesus was crucified on Thursday. That's not what my Bible teaches me. Okay? So, they were not able to prepare the body of Jesus for burial because of the coming Sabbath. So in hurried preparation, Jesus' body was placed in a borrowed tomb. Verse 56, then they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils late Friday night, and they rested on the Sabbath, Saturday, according to the commandment. This is Friday. They will come back after the Sabbath, which was Saturday, so the day they will come back on is Sunday. And they found the tomb empty, because Jesus had risen. But that's next Sunday's message. All right. Now, everything I read to you, all the gruesome details, Jesus did all that to pay for our sins. If you have never accepted Jesus, if you're not sure, if there's any doubt in your mind, please get it fixed today. Once we get done our questions and answers and we sing our invitation song, I'll stand right over there. And if you're not 100% sure that when you die you're going straight to heaven, you come grab me by the hand and say, Pastor, let's fix this today. Let's get it done. All right, for those of you watching on the internet, thank you for being with us. We have a special service Wednesday night this week at 6:30, Thanksgiving Eve service. You're all invited to come and be with us. In person, it will not be recorded. God bless you and have a great day.